Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Pamela Powers. She is the defense market lead for Maximus. Pamela, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
And CX is very much on the topic list of those in military leadership. CX both for civilian employees and for service members. It seems to be a particularly important issue now. What's your sense of what's going on?
Well, so I think for a long time, the Department of Defense didn't really focus on the individual, right? They focused on the organization as a whole, and they didn't really think about their employees as customers. And I think we're seeing some of that in difficulties with recruiting and retaining our folks across all of the services. CX and UX are relatively new terms in the Department of Defense. They haven't historically thought about designing systems and designing processes around the human. It's really been about mission accomplishment. But I think they're starting to shift, and the culture is shifting. The current administration and the past administrations have really put a focus on customer experience across the federal government for high-impact service providers, so those that touch the citizens on a daily basis. Rightfully so, because it's really important to make sure that the citizens that are accessing our services across the federal government trust, the government that they're accessing and get good customer service. But the Department of Defense hasn't really thought about it that way, and I think they're starting to shift. The Department of Defense CIO recently stood up a CXO office, which I think is a step in the right direction. That office is really going to be looking at data and the network efficiency and effectiveness, and designing and the systems and making sure that the systems are designed around the user. I think that's a really important first step. But there's so much more that the department can do, right, across the entire HR spectrum and across the digital transformation spectrum as well. I'm happy to go into either of those if you want to talk more about that.
Sure, yeah, and we'll also get into that idea of the data in the network, because there is a technology services underpinning to all of this and transitioning it. But let's talk about what are the pain points, do you sense, in, say, the DoD personnel function, Army HR command, and the other armed services have their equivalents of that. What is it that they need to fix, do you think?
Well, I mean, really, it's everything across the entire journey of a sailor, a soldier, a service member. I mean, a guardian and airman. Everything that they touch has some sort of user interface from the time they first access Army or the Air Force recruiting command to the time they get their training, to their promotions and their retention programs. To their retirements. Everything has a human at the center of that. It should be designed around that human. There are too many pain points to mention. After 28 years in the Air Force, I certainly experienced a lot of those pain points. And I will say that the current generation of warfighters are digitally focused. They have a digital mindset. They grew up knowing what good human-centered design looks like and what good customer service looks like. In their daily lives, they access good customer service every day, whether it be accessing USAA for their benefits or for their financial systems and their insurance, to some of the health care that they access in their private life. They understand what good looks like. They can order tools to do things at home through Amazon and get it the next day. Certainly in the Department of Defense, that isn't the case, right? So I think organizations like the Army Human Resources Command is starting to think differently. They're starting to focus on their customer, which is the soldiers and their family members, to make sure that they feel valued and they're treated in a way that that those soldiers trust their organization and they feel that they want to stay. So many of those broken promises or those touch points that are bad experiences, they all add up and they lead to a decision that soldier or airman has to make in their career and whether or not they stay or whether or not they join in the first place. So I think that that the organizations in the Department of Defense have a real opportunity to start thinking differently and designing processes and tools to meet the needs of the service members that they serve, right?
Sure. So if someone enlists and they're going to be there 2 years, that's one thing. But that middle echelon that you want to keep promoting through, they look at other organizations probably and say, what do I need to put up with this UX for if in the rest of the world I have that type of UX, just to put it in simple terms. And so there's a big retention, talent retention question that this invokes then.
Oh, most definitely, right? I mean, we're supposed to be the most advanced digital fighting force in the world, right? But the processes and the technology and the systems haven't caught pace with that, I think, across the board, especially on the CX and the UX design. We're starting to see digital transformations shift to a user-focused. I mean, it's really important to have that upfront understanding of what you're trying to solve, the problem that you're trying to solve, do that research, and then design the system around the users that are going to access that system. In the past, it was a lift and shift. And how many, I'm sure you've heard of many over the years, how many digital transformations failed? Because they didn't really understand what the problem was, or they didn't understand how the users were going to access that system efficiently and effectively. So, you know, there's so many use cases across the entire ecosystem that are ripe for a CX, human-centered design transformation.
Yes, and you have some, as you mentioned, personal background, a long career in the Air Force, and then you worked in DoD personnel after that, and then you moved to VA, which is really a continuance of, for many people, you know, from the standpoint, again, of the customer. It strikes me that they need almost in the DoD to take what they call what I'm calling anyway, the My approach. We have My Health eVet that was started by VA some years ago. There's My Social Security for the general population, this My account idea. Maybe that's what you're driving at here for the military experience.
Exactly. So my experience over at, well, first of all, my experience at the Air Force, I saw, you know, one way to do things. And then I left and was a senior leader in OSD for a short period of time, and then over at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And at VA, they're really leading the federal market in this space. They've been doing this since, you know, some of the problems of 2014 with accessing healthcare in VA. So they've been on this journey for a really long time. They started small and they've really expanded. Now they have a lot of funding, a lot of focus. And it's all about the center, the veteran at the center, right? How they want to be served, what is their best way to access benefits and health, and all of the things that VA does. And so they've really been a model for the entire federal government. So the Department of Defense can certainly learn some best practices from VA, but also, I mean, think about it. Like, I'll give you a use case in the Army HR. The VA personalizes everything they do, or they try to. They're really working towards that personalization, similar to what industry is doing and the commercial sector is doing, understanding all the data about that person before they ever even access the benefits. Think about an Army soldier if they called into the Army HRC and they called in because they had a promotions issue and one of their records wasn't up to date. And that call center said, "Hi, Major Smith, how are you doing today? How's your family doing today? How can I help you? I see that you sent an email in last week about your promotion, and I see that you're missing a record. How can I help you get that record into your system to make sure that you're meeting the board correctly?" And then following up with them once they get that documentation. I mean, that makes that soldier feel valued and respected, and it also allows that soldier to be focused on the mission at hand and not be focused on administrative, you know, issues that tend to happen a lot of times.
Yeah, I imagine if you are on a mission and doing something that is central to what the military is doing, if you have all these open issues in your private life or in your engagement with making sure, like you say, your paperwork and your reports are all up to date, that could be a hindrance to the ability to focus on the mission, and therefore the readiness could be just a touch off because of that.
Oh, most definitely. It happens every day. Like, all of our service members are having to deal with pay issues or health and benefits issues or promotions, whatever it might be, or transitioning to a new base. I know when I PCS to a new location, that process was incredibly painful. From everything from getting my orders wasn't done with a human-centered design lens to dealing with the logistics of moving, to getting the financial considerations taken care of, to making sure the childcare was all set to go and the lodging and the housing was all set to go at the next space. And then just figuring out, what I'm going to do for my job at the next space. All those touch points are ripe for a human-centered design or redesign to really focus on the needs of those service members as they're going through that journey from start to finish.
Okay, we're going to take a short break here, and then when we return, we'll get into some of those data issues, some of the integration issues, and the technology approaches to make sure that that happens on the front end. But again, we'll be right back. My guest is Pamela Powers. She is the Defense Market Lead at Maximus. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin here on Federal Insights, sponsored by Maximus on Federal News Network. Welcome back to Federal Insights, sponsored by Maximus here on Federal News Network. My guest today is Pamela Powers. She's the Defense Market Lead at Maximus. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. And earlier we were talking about this idea of the interface that is faced by a user, which is their portal to what they need to get done. And before we get to what goes on behind the scenes, it strikes me that your experience in the Air Force provides a good example of where this is happening in another domain, mainly relative to the 40s, 50s, 60s. The cockpit, is much more logical and much more attuned to what people are doing, making fast decisions at high speed. Good example, good analogy?
Yeah, I think that's where human-centered design really came out of, right? Human factors engineering back in the 70s and early 80s was really about designing the systems around that user, right, or that human in the middle of it. And cockpit is a great example of how the Air Force used human factors engineering to make sure that the cockpit was intuitive and everything was near where you could access it and you to make things easy to use and fast, right? And so I think the Air Forces and the other services have used that in some other weapon systems, certainly. And I think that's a great example of use cases of successful ways to use human factors engineering. But I think the services now need to take that next step and look at how they can apply those same principles to other areas of the mission, right? And almost everything every service member does in the military has some sort of user interface, whether it be making sure that they have data on the battlefield, to real-time data to be able to complete their mission, or managing supply systems, right? They all have user interfaces and they all need to be designed how best to make it efficient and effective for that user.
And you can have a great journey map and you can have a great intuitive front end, but behind all that, you need data management, analytics to some degree, especially in the HR area and the user experience for managing their lives. So discuss what some of those issues are that you need to have technically that is unseen by the user, but really enables what the user wants to happen in the first place.
Sure. So I think of it as an ecosystem of tools, processes, technology, and data that all interact to create an experience. And that holds true for every touch point along a journey, whatever that journey might be. And so it's not just a front-end website or a call center or user interface. It's all of the systems, the people, the processes, the technology that behind the scenes that have to talk to each other and that have to interact to make sure that experience is good. I look at some of the experiences I had in the Air Force. For example, when you had to get a benefits or a pay issue resolved, you might call into a call center and they might have very empathetic employees answering those calls. They'll take a ticket. they'll ask you to fax in some documents. You never know if those documents got to the right person. There's no follow through. You're not able to go on a website and really access and see what the status is. And so all of those back end processes, the systems have to talk to each other, and then it has to be intuitive for that call center person and personalized so they know how to handle that situation with each individual person.
Right, it's almost the idea of contact center more than call center, because contact takes many forms, and whoever it is that is being contacted by that service member or their spouse, or needs to have the same information, whether you're online on a chat or on the phone.
Oh, most definitely. And I think personalization on the consumer side has come a long way. Using AI, it's come a long way. So when you call into a help desk or a service desk or a call center, a contact center in the commercial world, they know a lot about you, right? In the services, we're not there yet, and we could be. And so really understanding, all of that and how to make sure that each one of those touch points along that journey is done appropriately, I think is really important. And I would add that that understanding the data is so critical, and because of all of the AI progress in the commercial sector, we really know how to design journeys and understand where the pain points are and how to resolve them, whether it be through a digital modernization or more human touch or maybe a website redesign. Understanding that data is critical, and it is there in the commercial sector. It is there in some of the federal government agencies. It's just not there yet in the Department of Defense.
Right, so then maybe discuss a little bit more detail the fact that you need data integration, I think, because
For sure.
old legacy applications produce their own data, and it was almost an ecosystem unto itself. In the CX area, especially when dealing with exceptions, which is what frustrates most people, or something complex like a change of, like you say, permanent change of station that you mentioned earlier, there's an integrative element and a data sharing element among applications that has to take place?
Yes, and I think all of the services are going through that data modernization, right? And they're all going through that digital transformation to be able to get away from silos of information and be able to share data. But there are some things that they can do until they reach that point, right? There are ways to enhance the journey in certain areas of high priority that matter to the soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine, or the Guardian now too.
Sure. What are some of those?
Well, so they could be focusing on some of the journey on the HR side, right? So like I talked about, the Army is now going down the path of enhancing their contact center as a service and enhancing the way they take care of their soldiers and their families. And so they're looking at redesigning their processes. They're looking at redesigning their call center to have that ability to seamlessly have a good experience for their soldiers. It's going to take a little bit of work, and they're going to be, reaching back to legacy systems. But I think they're starting that journey, and I think, it's going to come a long way with some focus and alignment.
All right, and we can't have a discussion like this without mentioning artificial intelligence.
Yes. Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, on the consumer side, it's been there for a while, that personalization. And I think it's a great thing to use as a tool in experience and not necessarily end all be all. There's certainly challenges with artificial intelligence, but one of the great things that it can bring is the data to understand the journey, understand the pain points along that journey. And it also can create personalization. One of the tools that we have in our total experience management solution for Maximus is an empathy program that actually allows you to see the sentiment of the user or the customer and how they're dealing with that interaction. But it also allows you to see how the employee is doing in that interaction as well. And maybe you need some additional training for that employee. Maybe you need some additional tools to allow that employee to better serve that customer, or implement some automation. So it goes back to understanding the journey, doing those journey maps, understanding the pain points, prioritizing where you can have the biggest bang for your dollar, or to meet the mission requirements, and then focusing on those areas and then build off that momentum.
Yeah, this idea of personalizing implies that since everyone is not a cookie cutter, that you would need some analytical function happening to be able to personalize it. And the more data and the more history you get with what people are having trouble with, the better your system can be. So almost like a self-improvement type of function could be built into these interfaces.
And that's what they do now. I mean, the technology has come so far in the private sector that it's there, right? They already know way before you call in everything about you. And I think the services have enough data right now on every single service member that they could do a piece of that for sure already. It's just being focused and make sure you're focusing on the right problem.
Yeah, and maybe it's even more enhanced for the military because they have a closed system. They know their people. They have all their data about their people. You don't have to ask IRS. You don't have to ask some commercial provider. The data is there from the moment a person steps into the military. Fair to say?
Yeah, that's a great point. They know everything about all of our service members. But what they don't know is they don't know their pain points, right? They're not looking at the data along that journey and seeing where they're really having problems and where those touch points might lead to them leaving, right? They're not gathering the data from, let's say, transition to a new base. They're not gathering that data on all the pain points that service member and their family goes through when they go to a new base. So those are the kind of things that they need to start looking at and collecting and doing user and service design to solve.
Yeah, it's almost as if you can take usability and really boost it to the 21st century. It's more than just usability. It's what's really going on with that person that you can tell from the actions as expressed in the software.
There's a lot of tools and technology and processes that are really best practices in the private sector that the department can take and use right away and make a significant difference. It just takes focus and effort, and I think that it would make a big difference.
All right, so you want to make it matter. Focus.
I want to make it matter.
All right.
For sure.
Thanks so much for being with us. I want to thank today's guest,
great.
Pamela Powers, the Defense Market Lead at Maximus. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Maximus.